Lock the door, Mommy. Please, I'm scared. Emily Carter froze at the sound of her daughter's trembling voice, her hand hovering over the deadbolt, as 56 headlights cut through the blizzard outside her dying diner. Massive men in leather and chains climbed off their motorcycles, faces frozen, one collapsing onto the snow. Every warning she'd ever been taught screamed at her to keep that door shut. Instead, she stepped forward. She had no idea this single choice would bring 1,500 more of them to her doorstep by morning. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from, because I want to see how far this story travels tonight. The wind hit the windows of the diner like something alive, like it was trying to get in the same way everyone else was trying to get out of it, and Emily Carter stood behind the counter, wiping down a coffee machine that hadn't worked properly in 3 weeks, telling herself that if she just kept her hands busy, the fear sitting in her chest wouldn't have anywhere else to go. Mommy, is it gonna snow forever? Her daughter Lily was 5, wrapped in 2 blankets on the booth closest to the kitchen, the only place in the building where the heat still limped through the vents. No, baby. Storms don't last forever. Nothing does. She said it more for herself than for Lily. 6 months. That's how long it had been since her husband Daniel packed a bag at 2 in the morning and left a note on the kitchen table instead of a goodbye. 6 months since she discovered the second mortgage he'd taken out behind her back, the Max credit cards, the empty savings account that used to have $11,000 in it and now had 143. 6 months of running our Carter's diner alone, cooking, serving, cleaning, doing the books at 2 in the morning after Lily fell asleep, watching the numbers get worse every single week. And now the furnace was dying in the middle of the worst storm Montana had seen in a decade. Mrs. Carter, Frank, her only remaining employee, 61 years old, worked for her father back when the diner still had a full staff and a full parking lot, stood by the thermostat with his jacket already on. The heat's not going to hold past midnight. I already called Denny. He's not answering. Roads are probably shot on his end too. I know, Frank. You should let me stay. No, get home before it gets worse. I mean it. Frank hesitated at the door, looking at her the way people had been looking at her for 6 months now. Like she was a woman standing on ice that was cracking under her feet, and everyone could see it except maybe her. You call me if anything happens. Anything at all. I will. He left. The bell above the door rang once sharp against the wind, and then it was just Emily, Lily, and the sound of a building trying to survive a storm it wasn't built for. She locked the door behind him and turned the sign to closed, even though closed didn't mean much when you were already this far past broke. For a while, there was nothing but the storm. Emily sat across from Lily, wrapped her in a third blanket, and told her a story about a fox that found its way home, even in the snow, because that was the kind of story a 5-year-old needed to hear on a night like this, even if her mother didn't entirely believe it herself anymore. That's when she heard it, a sound underneath the wind, low, constant, growing. Mommy, what's that? Emily stood, walked to the window, and felt her stomach drop before her mind even understood what she was looking at. Headlights, dozens of them, cutting through the snow on the highway, slowing, turning into her parking lot one after another, until the entire lot in front of her diner was filled with motorcycles and the men who rode them. Mommy, stay right there, Lily. Don't move. Emily's hands were shaking as she watched them dismount. Big men, enormous men, some of them wrapped in leather that couldn't possibly be enough for weather like this, patches on their backs. She recognized even from this distance, because everyone in this part of Montana knew what those patches meant. Hell's Angels. 50, maybe 60 of them, directly outside her diner. Lily, baby, I need you to go in the back office right now. Mommy, I'm scared. I know. I need you to trust me. Go. Lily didn't argue. She ran, blankets trailing behind her like a small ghost, and disappeared through the kitchen door, and Emily stood alone at the front of her diner, watching 56 of the most dangerous-looking men she had ever seen in her life walk toward her front door in a storm that was actively trying to kill anyone caught outside in it. The first one reached the door and knocked, not pounded, knocked almost politely, which somehow scared her more than if he'd hit it with his fist. Emily didn't move. He knocked again. Ma'am, we're not looking for trouble. We got caught in the storm. Our club got separated on the highway back there, and we got men out here who aren't going to make it another hour in this cold. We saw your lights on. Please. Every instinct in Emily's body told her to stay behind that locked door. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A lifetime of small-town warnings about men who looked exactly like the ones standing in her parking lot right now. Leather jackets, tattoos crawling up necks, patches, announcing exactly who they belonged to. But then the wind shifted and the porch light caught the face of the man closest to the glass. He wasn't young, 50, maybe older, gray beard trimmed neat despite the storm. And his eyes weren't the eyes of a predator sizing up prey. They were the eyes of a man who was scared for people who weren't him. Behind him, another rider was being half carried by two others, his head hanging, his legs barely moving. "He's hypothermic," the man at the door said, voice cracking now, all that careful calm falling apart. "Please, ma'am, I'm begging you." Emily's hand was on the deadbolt. She thought about Daniel, about the note on the kitchen table, about 6 months of learning the hard way that people weren't always who they seemed. She thought about her father, dead 4 years now, and the thing he used to say every time somebody came through that door, looking rough around the edges, and half the town would whisper about it later. Never judge someone when they need help the most, Emily. That's when you find out who they really are, and it's when you find out who you are too. She turned the lock, the door opened, and the storm rushed in with 56 freezing bikers behind it. Then, for a moment, nobody moved. Emily stood in her own doorway with the wind screaming past her, looking at more leather and ink and hard-weathered faces than she'd seen collected in one place in her entire life. And every single one of them was looking back at her like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Ma'am," the man with the gray beard said again, quieter now. "Thank you, I mean that. Thank you." "Get him inside," Emily said, nodding at the man being carried. "Now, booth in the back, away from the door." They moved, fast coordinated like men used to handling emergencies, and within 90 seconds, her diner, a building meant to seat maybe 40 people comfortably, had 56 frozen, exhausted, storm-beaten bikers filling every inch of open floor. Emily's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, but there wasn't time to be afraid. Not really, because the man on the floor near the back booth had gone still in a way that made every maternal instinct in her body override every fear. "What's wrong with him?" she asked, kneeling. "Tommy," the gray-bearded man said. "He went into the ditch about 2 miles back, trying to keep his bike upright. Been wet since then. We couldn't get him warm." Emily pressed 2 fingers to Tommy's neck. His pulse was there, but slow. Too slow. "Get his wet clothes off him. All of it. Now." Nobody argued. "Blankets," she said, standing, already moving toward the storage closet. "I have blankets in the back, extras from the storage room, and I need every dry towel in this building." 3 men followed her without being asked twice. For the next 20 minutes, Emily forgot to be afraid of the 55 other bikers filling her diner, because she was entirely focused on Tommy, stripping him of his wet clothes, wrapping him in every dry blanket and towel she owned, having 2 of the bigger men lie beside him, because body heat worked faster than anything else she had access to out here, with no ambulance able to reach them. "Come on," she muttered, checking his pulse again. "Come on, don't you dare." The gray-bearded man knelt beside her, the entire time watching her hands work with an intensity that told her he'd seen this kind of cold kill men before. "You a nurse?" he asked quietly. "No, single mom. You learn things. You're doing better than the paramedics who worked on my brother 2 winters back." Emily didn't answer that. She didn't have room in her chest for anything except the rhythm of Tommy's pulse under her fingers. 25 minutes in, his eyes fluttered open. "There you are," Emily said, relief crashing through her so hard her hands shook. "Stay with me. Can you say your name?" "Tommy," he rasped. "Tommy Reyes." "Good, good, Tommy. You're safe. You were inside." The entire diner had gone quiet during this 50-some grown men, some of them the size of door frames, watching a 120-pound woman pull one of their brothers back from the edge of something none of them wanted to name out loud. When Emily finally sat back on her heels, hands trembling from adrenaline, the gray-bearded man extended his own hand toward her. "Jack Morgan," he said, "road captain for this chapter. I owe you something I don't have words for right now." Emily shook his hand. Her fingers were still shaking. "Emily Carter," she said. "This is my diner. Was my father's before that." "Well, Emily Carter." Jack looked around at his men, at the blankets, at Tommy, breathing steady now under 3 layers of borrowed warmth. "You just saved a life tonight. Several, probably, the way this storm's going. Anybody would have done the same." Jack's face changed at that, something sharpening behind his eyes. "No, ma'am," he said. "They wouldn't have. You have any idea how many doors we knocked on tonight before yours? Emily didn't answer. 4, Jack said. 4 doors. Every single one of them saw our patches through the window and turned the lights off pretending nobody was home. You're the first person tonight who looked at 56 of us standing in a blizzard and saw people instead of a headline. The next hour passed in a strange, careful rhythm, bikers finding places to sit on the floor, since the booths could only hold so many. Emily moving between tables, checking on the ones who'd taken the worst of the cold. Frank's old coffee machine somehow still working just enough to produce lukewarm coffee that every single one of them thanked her for, like she'd handed them gold. "Ma'am, you got anything we could pay you with?" one of the younger riders asked, maybe 30, a scar cutting through his eyebrow. "We're not looking for a free ride here." "Don't worry about that tonight. We insist." He said, "Don't worry about it." Emily's voice came out sharper than she'd meant it to, and she softened it immediately. "You're not paying customers tonight. You're people stuck in a storm. That's all this is." The young rider looked at Jack, who nodded once, and the conversation ended there, though Emily noticed several of them exchanging looks she couldn't quite read. Around 9, Lily's small voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Mommy." Every head in the diner turned. Emily's stomach dropped, and she moved fast, crossing the room before Lily could take another step out into a room full of strangers 3 times her size. Hey, it's okay, baby." Emily crouched, blocking Lily's view as much as she could. "I told you to stay in the back. I heard yelling. I got scared." "Nobody's yelling now. Everything's okay." But Lily had already seen them, 56 enormous men filling her mother's diner, and her small body went rigid with the kind of fear that 5-year-olds feel in their whole bodies before they have words for it. Jack Morgan, watching from 10 feet away, did something Emily didn't expect. He got down on one knee, all 230 pounds of him folding down to Lily's height, hands open and visible on his thighs. "Hey there," he said, voice gentle in a way that didn't match anything else about him. "I bet you're wondering why a bunch of big, scary-looking guys just showed up in your mom's diner in the middle of the night." Lily nodded slowly from behind Emily's leg. "Truth is, we got caught out in that storm and we were real cold, and your mom let us come inside to warm up. That's a brave thing she did. You know that. Brave, real brave. Braver than most grown-ups I know." Lily peeked further out from behind Emily. "Are you a bad guy?" The diner went dead silent. 55 other men held their breath. Jack considered the question with the same seriousness he'd give a state trooper. "I've made mistakes in my life. Some big ones. But I got a granddaughter about your age back home, and if she ever got caught in a storm like this, I'd want somebody like your mom to open the door for her too." Lily studied him for a long moment. "You have a granddaughter?" "Sure do. Her name's Sophie. I'm Lily." "Nice to meet you, Lily. Thank you for sharing your mom with us tonight." And just like that, something in the room exhaled. Emily felt her daughter's grip on her leg loosen, watched her step forward 1/2 inch, still cautious but no longer frozen with fear. And something about the sight of this massive, hardened biker speaking so carefully to her daughter cracked something open in Emily's chest that 6 months of loneliness had sealed shut. By 10:30, the diner had settled into something Emily never could have predicted a few hours earlier. Not chaos, not danger, but a strange, rough kind of warmth. Several of the bikers had gathered around Lily, showing her patches on their jackets, letting her ask 100 questions about their motorcycles that they answered like she was the most important interviewer they'd ever spoken to. "This one's called a Harley Fat Boy," a rider named Marcus told her, showing her a photo on his phone of his own bike buried somewhere under snow outside. "Loudest one on the road. Louder than thunder." "Some nights, yeah." Emily watched from the counter, exhaustion and disbelief mixing together in her chest, and Jack came to stand beside her. "Your girl's got good instincts," he said. "Took her about 10 minutes to figure out we're not what we look like." "Took me longer than that." "You still let us in before you figured it out. That's the part that matters." Emily wrapped both hands around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do y'all wear the patches, the reputation? Doesn't it bother you people being afraid before they even know you?" Jack was quiet for a moment, looking out at his men scattered across her diner floor, some sleeping, now exhaustion finally catching them, others talking low among themselves. "Every one of these men in here has a story people would never guess," he said. "Tommy, the one you saved tonight, 2 tours in Afghanistan, came home and couldn't find anybody who understood what he'd seen, except us. Marcus over there showing your daughter his bike. Lost his wife to cancer 3 years back. This club is the only family he's got left standing. Half these men wear this patch because it's the only place that ever accepted them exactly as broken as they were. Emily looked around the room differently after that. And the reputation, some of it we earned years back, different leadership, different times. Some of it's just what people want to believe because it's easier than looking closer. We don't get to control the whole story. We just get to control what kind of men we are when the story's actually happening. Like tonight. Emily didn't have a response to that. She just nodded, feeling something settle in her chest that felt almost like understanding. It was close to midnight when Tommy Reyes, sitting up now, color back in his face, called Emily over to his booth. "Ma'am, I want to say something." "You don't have to." "I do." Tommy's voice was rough, still recovering, but steady. "I was 17 years old the last time somebody looked at me the way most people in this town look at us. Ran away from a bad home, ended up on the road. This club's the only reason I'm not dead in a ditch somewhere, and I mean that literal. Tonight I was closer to dying in a ditch than I've been since then. And you opened your door. Anybody would have." "No," Tommy said, echoing Jack's words from earlier. "They wouldn't have. You did, and I won't forget that." Around the room, several other bikers nodded in agreement, low murmurs of assent traveling through the tired crowd, and Emily felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. Not pity, not fear, not the exhausted numbness of just surviving one more day. She felt seen. She excused herself to check on Lily, who had finally fallen asleep in the back booth, surrounded by 3 watchful bikers who'd taken it upon themselves to guard her rest like she was something precious. And Emily stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and let herself cry for exactly 90 seconds before wiping her face and going back to work. The storm didn't let up until nearly 4 in the morning. By then, most of the bikers were asleep where they sat, exhaustion having finally overtaken the adrenaline of the night, and Emily moved quietly between them, checking on Tommy one more time, adjusting a blanket here, refilling a coffee cup there for the few who were still awake. Jack found her by the window around 4:30, both of them watching the snow finally start to slow outside. "You haven't slept," he said. "Neither have you. Somebody's got to keep watch." "On what 55 sleeping men and a 5-year-old? Jack almost smiled. Force of habit. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Emily spoke without entirely deciding to. "I don't know how I'm going to keep this place open past next month." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something about the honesty of the night that made honesty easier to give away. "Furnace is dying, roof needs work I can't afford, and my husband left 6 months ago with everything we had in savings and then some. I've been telling myself I'll figure it out, but I'm running out of months to figure it out in." Jack listened without interrupting the way Emily imagined a man listens when he's spent a lifetime hearing hard stories from broken men and learned that the listening mattered more than any response he could offer. "You didn't have to tell me that," he said finally. "I don't know why I did. Because for one night you got to be a person instead of just a woman surviving. That matters. Don't apologize for it." Emily wiped her eyes, quickly embarrassed, and Jack pretended not to notice what she was grateful for. "Storm's breaking," he said instead, nodding toward the window. "We'll clear out at first light. Get out of your hair. You don't have to rush. We've taken enough of your night, Emily Carter. But I want you to know something before we go." He turned to face her fully. "People like you are rare, genuinely rare. And people like us, we don't forget the ones who stood with us when the world turned its back. That's not a threat, and it's not charity talk. It's just true." Emily didn't fully understand what he meant by it, not yet, not at 4:30 in the morning with exhaustion sitting behind her eyes like sand. She just nodded because it felt like the kind of thing you said thank you to, even without knowing exactly what you were thanking someone for. Then, by 6 in the morning, the storm had broken into pale gray light, and one by one the bikers began to stir, checking on each other, checking on Tommy, who insisted he was strong enough to ride, even though 3 separate men told him otherwise. "You're not getting on a bike today, Tommy," Jack said, tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll figure out a ride for you. That's final." Tommy grumbled but didn't push it, which told Emily everything about how much respect Jack commanded in this group without ever raising his voice. As the men gathered their things, several of them stopped by the counter where Emily stood, each one offering some version of the same words, "Thank you. We won't forget this. You saved lives tonight," until Emily's chest felt tight with an emotion she couldn't fully name. Marcus was the last to approach Lily, trailing beside him, holding a small metal pin shaped like a motorcycle wheel he'd given her sometime in the night. "She's a tough kid," Marcus said. "Good judge of character, too, once she got past the leather." "Takes after her mother," Jack added, appearing behind them, already pulling his jacket back on. Emily walked them all to the door as the sun climbed weakly over the snow-covered highway, watching 56 men who had terrified her 12 hours earlier, now feeling almost like something else entirely. Not friends, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Something she didn't have a word for yet. Jack was the last one out the door, Tommy riding in the sidecar of another man's bike, since his own machine wouldn't start after the cold. "Emily," Jack said, turning back one final time, "you gave us shelter when you had every reason not to. That's not something men like us forget. Not ever." "I just did what my father would have done." "Then your father raised somebody worth admiring." He climbed onto his bike, and one by one the engines roared back to life. 56 motorcycles pulling out of her snow-covered parking lot and disappearing down the highway until the sound faded into the wind and the diner was quiet again. Empty except for Emily and Lily standing in the doorway watching them go. "Mommy," Lily said, looking up at her, "were they really bad guys?" Emily thought about Tommy's pulse under her fingers, about Jack kneeling to Lily's height, about Marcus and his phone full of photos of a wife he'd lost, about 56 strangers who had turned her worst night in months into something she still didn't have words for. "No, baby," she said. "They weren't bad guys at all." She locked the door behind them, exhausted in a way that went bone deep, and told herself the night was over. Now that things would go back to the way they'd been before the quiet struggle, the late nights with the books, the slow drowning she'd been doing for 6 months. She had no idea that 3 days later, the ground outside her diner would begin to shake with the sound of 1,500 engines, and that the story of one freezing night would travel further than she could have ever imagined. 3 days passed after the storm, and Emily told herself the strange, impossible night with 56 bikers had been exactly what it looked like, a single moment of crisis over now filed away as something she'd tell Lily about when she was older. She went back to flipping eggs before dawn, back to counting nickels in the register after close back to the quiet grinding fear of a woman watching her life shrink one bill at a time. But the town hadn't let it go the way Emily had. "Heard you had some company the other night," said Carol Dunbar, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Tuesday morning coffee already growing cold in front of her because she hadn't come in for coffee. She'd come in for information. "Whole town's talking about it, Emily. They got caught in the storm. I gave them shelter. That's all it was." "That's all it was?" Carol repeated the words like she didn't believe a syllable of them. 50 of those Hells Angels men in your diner all night with your little girl in the building?" 56, Emily said, and regretted it instantly because Carol's eyebrows shot up like she'd confirmed something dangerous. 56, Lord Emily, anything could have happened. Nothing happened. They were freezing. I opened the door. One of them nearly died of hypothermia and I saved his life. That's the whole story. Carol didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further, just gathered her coat and left a $5 bill on the counter for a coffee she never finished, and Emily stood there feeling the old familiar weight of being watched, judged, whispered about. Except now, the whispers had a new subject, and it was her. By Wednesday, half the town seemed to know some version of the story, and every version was worse than the last. "They say those bikers trashed the place. I heard one of them threatened her. I heard she let them stay because she owed somebody money." None of it was true. None of it mattered. The rumors moved faster than facts ever did in a town this small, and Emily found herself explaining over and over to customers who'd known her since she was a child that no, nothing bad had happened, that the men who'd filled her diner that night had been nothing but respectful, that one of them had nearly died and she'd kept him alive with her own 2 hands. Nobody seemed to want to hear that part. "You should have called the sheriff," said Roger Ellison, who owned the hardware store 2 doors down and had known Emily's father for 30 years. "Man like that would have had every one of them arrested for trespassing before they got a boot through your door." "They weren't trespassing, Roger. They were freezing to death. Doesn't matter what they were doing, matters what they could have done." Emily set his coffee down harder than she meant to. Nothing happened, Roger. I'm still standing here, aren't I? Roger didn't answer, that just took his coffee and his judgment and went back to his store, and Emily stood behind her counter feeling something she hadn't expected to feel after a night that had in its own strange way been one of the best nights she'd had in months. She felt ashamed. Not of what she'd done, ashamed of how alone she felt in a town full of people who'd rather believe the worst about strangers than trust the woman who'd actually been there. That same week, the real crisis arrived, and it had nothing to do with bikers or storms. It came in an envelope, cream-colored, official, sitting in her mailbox on Thursday morning between a grocery flyer and a past-due notice from the electric company. Emily opened it, standing in the cold, Lily tugging at her coat sleeve, asking if they could go inside yet, and she read the letter twice before the words actually landed. Notice of default. Final opportunity to cure. 30 days. The bank. The second mortgage Daniel had taken out without telling her, secured against the diner itself, 6 months behind now, because Emily had been paying the first mortgage, and utilities and payroll, and had nothing left over for a debt she hadn't even known existed until it was already drowning her. 30 days to pay $18,000 or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings on the only thing her father had ever left her. Mommy, you're squeezing my hand too hard. Emily looked down, realized she'd been gripping Lily's fingers without meaning to, and forced herself to loosen her grip, forced her voice into something calm, even though her entire chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Sorry, baby. Come on, let's get you warm. Inside, she sat at the counter with the letter in front of her and did the math over and over, hoping it would come out different if she just tried hard enough. But $18,000 didn't turn into something smaller, no matter how many times she added it up. She had $412 in the business account. She had $143 in savings. She had a daughter who needed shoes, a furnace that was one cold night from dying completely, and 30 days to find $18,000 she had no earthly way of getting. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Emily sat alone in the dark diner with the letter still on the counter and let herself cry the way she hadn't let herself cry in 6 months. Not the quiet, controlled tears she allowed herself during the day, but the kind that came from somewhere deep and ugly, the kind that made her chest hurt and her breath catch, the kind that came from a woman who had been fighting alone for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like not to. I can't do this, she whispered to nobody. I can't do this by myself anymore. The diner didn't answer her, nothing did, and she sat there until almost 2 a.m. before she finally dragged herself upstairs to the small apartment above the diner and fell into a sleep too exhausted to dream. Friday morning, Frank found her staring at the letter again, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking from. That the bank, he asked, already knowing the answer from the look on her face. Second mortgage Daniel took out. I didn't even know about it until 3 months ago. I've been paying what I can, but her voice caught. They want $18,000 in 30 days, Frank. I don't have $18,000. I don't have $1,800. Frank sat down across from her, his old hands folding together on the counter. What happens if you can't pay it? They foreclose. Take the diner. Everything my dad built, everything I've been killing myself to keep alive for 6 months gone. There's got to be options. Talk to the bank, maybe. I already tried, Frank. I called Tuesday. They said unless I can produce the full amount or a significant portion of it, there's nothing to discuss. They've already started the paperwork. Frank was quiet for a long moment, and Emily could see him searching for something to say. Some piece of wisdom that might fix an unfixable problem, but there wasn't one, and they both knew it. I'm sorry, Emily. Your dad would be sick over this. My dad would tell me to figure it out, so that's what I'm going to do. She said it with more confidence than she felt because the truth was sitting there Friday morning with 30 days on the clock. Emily Carter had absolutely no idea how she was going to figure anything out at all. The days that followed blurred into a single grinding rhythm of trying everything and finding every door closed. She called 3 different banks about a personal loan and was rejected by all 3, her credit already wrecked by Daniel's debts, her income too unstable, her collateral already tied up in a mortgage that was actively being foreclosed on. She called a cousin in Billings she hadn't spoken to in 4 years, swallowed her pride completely, and asked for help only to be told gently but firmly that they simply didn't have that kind of money to spare. She even, in a moment of complete desperation on Sunday night, looked up payday loan companies online before closing the laptop and pushing it away, disgusted with herself, knowing that kind of debt would only trade one crisis for a worse one. Mommy, why do you look sad all the time now? Lily's question hit Emily somewhere she wasn't prepared for, sitting at the kitchen table Sunday evening with bills spread out in front of her like a losing hand of cards. I'm not sad, baby, just thinking hard about grown-up stuff. Is it about the diner? Emily looked up sharply. Why would you think that? Because you always look at the diner sad now. You used to look at it happy. Out of the mouths of 5-year-olds came the truths adults spent their whole lives avoiding, and Emily felt something in her chest crack wide open because Lily was right. She had stopped looking at the diner with anything but dread and grief for weeks now. This place her father built with his own hands, the place she'd grown up running between tables as a child, now just a countdown clock ticking toward a loss she couldn't stop. The diner's going to be okay, Emily said, though she had no idea if that was true. I'm going to figure it out. I promise. She pulled Lily into her lap and held her there for a long time, longer than the moment probably called for, because she needed it as much as her daughter did. Monday brought a different kind of trouble. Marlene Whitfield, who ran the largest realty office in the county and sat on the town's small business council, stopped by the diner around lunchtime with a proposition Emily didn't ask for and didn't want. I heard about your situation with the bank, Marlene said, settling into a booth like she owned it. Small towns, Emily. Word travels. I appreciate the concern, Marlene, but I've got it handled. Do you, though? Marlene's smile was thin, practiced the kind of smile that had closed 1,000 deals and broken just as many people along the way. Because I happen to know the bank is moving fast on this one, and I also happen to have a client very interested in this exact piece of property. Corner lot highway frontage, perfect for a gas station and convenience store. He's prepared to make a cash offer that would clear your debt entirely and put a little extra in your pocket besides. This diner isn't for sale. It's about to be foreclosed on, dear. Might as well get something out of it before the bank takes everything and you get nothing. Emily felt heat rising in her chest, something sharp and protective flooding through her. My father built this diner with his own hands, Marlene. I am not selling it to some stranger so he can put up a gas station. I understand it's emotional, but emotional decisions are how people end up with nothing at all instead of something. Get out. Marlene's eyebrows rose, clearly not used to being spoken to that way. Excuse me. I said get out of my diner. I'm not interested in your offer, and I'm not interested in you sitting here trying to talk me out of the only thing my family has left. Marlene stood smoothing her coat with exaggerated calm, though Emily could see the irritation flickering underneath. You've got 30 days, Emily. Less now. When the bank takes it anyway, and my client's still the only buyer interested in a rundown roadside diner nobody else wants, you'll remember this conversation and wish you'd been smarter about it. She left without paying for the coffee she'd ordered, and Emily stood there shaking with anger and fear in equal measure, watching the woman's expensive car pull out of the parking lot, feeling the walls of her situation closing in from every direction. Now the bank on one side, vultures like Marlene on the other, and nothing but 30 rapidly shrinking days standing between her and losing everything. That night after closing, Emily sat at the counter with the notice from the bank and a legal pad where she'd been trying uselessly to brainstorm any possible solution when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer it. She was exhausted, drained down to nothing, and the last thing she wanted was another creditor or another vulture circling. But something made her pick up. Hello, Emily Carter. A man's voice, gravelly familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. Speaking. Who's this? It's Jack. Jack Morgan, from the Storm. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't expected to hear from any of them again, hadn't really expected the night to have any continuation beyond the memory of it. Jack, hi. Is everything okay? Is Tommy? Tommy's fine. Recovering good, actually should be back on his bike within the week if the doc has anything to say about it. That's not why I'm calling. Oh, Emily wasn't sure what to say. Then what? Marcus mentioned something to me. Said one of the guys stopped by your diner today for gas up the road. Heard some talk in town about you having trouble with the bank. Foreclosure, something like that. That true? Emily's stomach dropped. She hadn't told any of them about the letter, hadn't planned to. And the fact that word had already reached Jack through some chain of small-town gossip made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't prepared for. It's, it's a complicated situation, Jack. It's not something I need help with. I'll figure it out. Didn't say you needed help, asked if it was true. Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion and pride warring inside her chest. Yes, she said quietly. It's true. My husband took out a second mortgage before he left. I didn't know about it until it was already 6 months behind, and now the bank's giving me 30 days to come up with $18,000, or they take the diner. I don't have $18,000, Jack. I don't have 1,800. There was a silence on the line long enough that Emily wondered if the call had dropped. Jack, you still there? I'm here. His voice had changed, gone quiet and serious in a way that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. Emily, I want you to listen to me carefully, and I don't want you to argue with what I'm about to say. Jack, I appreciate the thought, but I can't accept money from... I'm not offering you money. Then what? I'm making a phone call after this one, and then I'm going to make another one. And you're not going to understand what any of it means right now. And that's fine, you don't need to. Just do me one favor. What favor? Don't sign anything, don't sell anything. Don't let that realtor or the bank or anybody else convince you to make a decision in the next few days. Can you promise me that? Emily didn't fully understand what was happening, but something in Jack's voice, steady, certain, entirely unlike the desperate exhaustion she'd heard from him the night of the storm, made her nod, even though he couldn't see her. Okay, I promise. Good. Get some sleep, Emily. You've had a hard week. It's about to get a lot better. He hung up before she could ask what he meant, and Emily sat at the counter, holding a phone that had gone silent, feeling something strange and unfamiliar stirring beneath the exhaustion and fear. Hope. Fragile, unexplainable hope. She didn't know what Jack Morgan was doing on the other end of that phone call, and if she had known, she might not have believed it. Jack sat in his own kitchen, 200 miles away, phone pressed to his ear, and made the second call. He'd promised this one to a man named Big Sal Reyes, National Road Captain, for a network of chapters that stretched from Montana to Texas, and Tommy's own uncle, besides though that particular detail hadn't come up yet. Sal, it's Jack. Jack Morgan. Been a minute. What's going on? You remember I told you about that storm 3 days back. 56 of us got caught out. Tommy went down with hypothermia. Yeah, you said some woman took you all in. Saved Tommy's life. That's right, Emily Carter. Runs a little diner off Highway 12. Single mom, 5-year-old daughter, husband, ran out on her with a mountain of debt behind his back. Now the bank's about to take the only thing she's got left because of a second mortgage she didn't even know existed until it was already drowning her son. That's rough. It's more than rough, Sal. That woman opened her door to 56 strangers in the worst blizzard this state's seen in a decade. She didn't know us from Adam. Could have called the sheriff, could have turned off her lights and pretended she wasn't home like 4 other places did that night. Instead, she let us in and fed us with the last food she had and kept Tommy breathing with her own 2 hands while we all just stood there. Sal was quiet for a moment. What are you asking me, Jack? I'm asking you to make some calls. I'm asking every chapter within riding distance to hear this story. Not asking for money, not asking for a donation drive. I'm asking for something bigger than that. Meaning what? Jack's voice was steady, certain, carrying the weight of a decision he'd clearly been sitting with since the moment he'd rolled out of Emily's parking lot 3 days earlier. Meaning I want every rider who can make it there to show up at that diner. I want this woman to understand exactly what it means when somebody protects one of ours. I want the whole town watching when we do it. Sal exhaled slowly on the other end. You're talking about a full show, Jack. That's not a small thing. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Sal, and I know exactly what she deserves. There was a pause, and then Sal's voice came back different, warmer, something like admiration underneath the gravel. All right, brother, let me make some calls. How many days she got? Bank gave her 30. I don't want to wait that long. I want this handled before she has time to lose faith that anybody's coming. Give me till Friday. Jack looked at the calendar on his kitchen wall, counting the days, feeling something settle in his chest that felt almost like the closest thing to peace he'd known since he'd lost his own daughter years back. A chance maybe to protect somebody the way he hadn't been able to protect her. Friday works, he said. Make it count, Sal. Back at the diner, Emily had no idea any of this was happening. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in the same grinding rhythm as before, customers whispering, Marlene's realtor client apparently sending a second more aggressive letter with an actual dollar figure attached to it, the bank calling twice to confirm the 30-day timeline was firm. But Thursday brought something strange. A man Emily didn't recognize walked into the diner around 10 in the morning, ordered coffee, and sat at the counter reading something on his phone for nearly 20 minutes before finally speaking. "You, Emily Carter." "That's me. Can I get you anything else?" "No, ma'am. Just wanted to say my brother rode with the group that got caught in that storm a few weeks back." "Tommy Reyes, you probably remember him." Emily's chest tightened with recognition. "Of course I remember Tommy. How's he doing?" "Better every day, thanks to you. Wanted to come by and see the place myself. Real nice little spot you got here." There was something in the way he said it, something almost reverent, like he was seeing more than just a diner. And Emily didn't understand it until he left a $20 bill for a $3 coffee and told her to keep the change before walking back out to a motorcycle Emily hadn't noticed sitting in her lot. By Thursday afternoon, it had happened 3 more times. Strangers on motorcycles, men. Emily had never met stopping in for coffee or a sandwich, asking careful questions about the storm, about Tommy, about what had happened that night before leaving without explaining why they had really come. "You noticing something weird happening?" Frank asked, watching a fourth rider pull out of the lot Thursday evening. "I don't know what's going on, Frank, but something's happening. I can feel it." She thought about calling Jack, asking him directly what he'd meant on the phone, what these strange visits meant, why word of that single stormy night seemed to be spreading in a direction she couldn't quite trace. But something told her to wait. Something told her that whatever Jack Morgan had set into motion, it wasn't hers to interrupt. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. The kind of sharp blue sky that came after a hard winter finally started loosening its grip, and Emily woke up feeling the same exhausted dread she'd been waking up with for days now, the bank's 30-day clock ticking louder in her mind with every sunrise. 26 days left. $18,000 still impossibly out of reach. A realtor circling, a town whispering, a daughter asking why her mother looked sad all the time. She went through the motions of opening the diner, flipping the sign, starting the coffee, telling herself that whatever was happening with these strange rider visits, it probably didn't mean what some fragile, foolish part of her wanted it to mean. By 7, Frank arrived, took one look at her face and didn't ask what was wrong, because he already knew. "You sleep at all?" "Some." "Emily." Frank's voice carried a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Whatever's coming, whatever happens with this place, you did everything right. You know that everything your father would have done. Feels like everything right still isn't enough, Frank. Sometimes it isn't, not on its own. Sometimes right needs a little help showing up behind it." Emily didn't understand what he meant, not fully, and there wasn't time to ask, because the first customers of the morning were already coming through the door, and the day demanded to be lived whether she felt ready for it or not. By mid-morning, something felt different in the air. Not the storm from weeks earlier, nothing so dramatic, but a strange electric quality to the quiet, like the whole town was holding its breath without knowing why. Emily noticed 3, then 4, then 6 separate customers, all glancing at their phones with unusual attention, murmuring to each other in low voices, and she assumed it was ordinary town gossip, until Carol Dunbar burst through the door around 11 with an expression Emily had never seen on her before. Not judgment this time, but something closer to shock. Emily, you need to come outside." "Carol, I'm in the middle of..." "Now, Emily, you need to see this right now." Something in Carol's voice, urgent and strange, made Emily set down the coffee pot immediately and follow her toward the front windows, Lily trailing behind, having come down from the apartment upstairs for lunch, and what Emily saw through the glass stopped her cold. Down the highway, stretching as far as the horizon allowed her to see, was a line of motorcycles that seemed to have no end. Not 50, not 100. Motorcycles filled every lane of the highway, engines roaring in a sound so massive it felt less like noise and more like the earth itself shifting beneath her feet. And Emily stood frozen in her own doorway, with her hand pressed against the glass, unable to process the scale of what she was witnessing. "Mommy," Lily whispered, pressing close against her leg. "Is it a storm?" Emily couldn't answer. She could only watch as the endless line of riders began slowing, began turning one after another, into the parking lot of her small, struggling roadside diner, filling every available inch of space and spilling out onto the shoulder of the highway itself, hundreds of engines cutting off in a rolling wave until an eerie, massive silence settled over the entire street, broken only by the creak of leather and the low murmur of hundreds of voices. The whole town had come outside now, drawn by the impossible sound, standing on sidewalks and in doorways, staring at a sight none of them had words for. Emily's hand was shaking against the glass. This wasn't 56 riders caught in a storm. This was something else entirely, something so large and so deliberate that Emily felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she understood about that stormy night weeks earlier. And standing at the very front of the crowd, walking toward her diner with the same steady, certain gait she remembered from 3 weeks ago, was Jack Morgan. He stopped just outside her door, looking at her through the glass with an expression Emily couldn't quite read, pride maybe, or something even bigger than that. And behind him, stretching back further than Emily's eyes could track, stood more Hell's Angels than she had ever imagined existed in one place. Jack raised his hand, not in a wave, but in something closer to a salute, and Emily felt her legs nearly give out beneath her as understanding began to dawn, slow and enormous and impossible. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't over. Emily's legs did not give out, though for a moment she thought they might, her hands still pressed flat against the glass of her own front door, as if the glass itself were the only thing keeping her upright. Jack Morgan stood on the other side of it, hand raised in that same steady salute, and behind him the parking lot had disappeared entirely beneath motorcycles and leather, and men who kept coming, kept arriving, an ocean of them, stretching back and down the highway further than Emily's eyes could follow. "Mommy," Lily whispered again, tugging at her sleeve. "Are they the same ones from the snow?" "I don't know, baby." Emily's voice came out thin, unsteady. "I don't know." Carol Dunbar stood beside her, one hand pressed to her own chest, staring out at the same impossible scene with an expression that had shifted entirely from suspicion to something closer to awe. "Emily, Carol said quietly. "Emily, how many of them are there?" "I don't know that either." The door hadn't opened yet. Jack stood outside it, patient, unmoving, and Emily realized with a jolt that he was waiting for her the same way he'd waited 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a blizzard, for her to make the choice that had somehow led to this. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the lock. She turned it, pulled the door open. The sound hit her first, not engines. Now those had gone quiet, but hundreds of low voices, boots against pavement and leather, creaking a low hum of humanity so massive it felt like standing at the edge of the ocean. "Jack," her voice cracked on his name. "Jack, what is this? What's happening?" Jack Morgan stepped forward, and up close, Emily could see his eyes were wet, though his voice stayed steady. Controlled, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment and still wasn't fully prepared for how it would feel to actually live it. "Emily Carter," he said her full name like it mattered, like it deserved weight. "3 weeks ago, you opened this door to 56 strangers in a storm that should have killed some of us. You didn't know us. You had every reason in the world to leave that door locked. Instead, you saved Tommy's life. With your own 2 hands, fed us with food you couldn't afford to give away, and let your own daughter sleep in a room full of men the whole world tells her to be afraid of." "Jack, I don't understand what—" "I'm not finished." His voice cracked slightly, there just once, and he pushed through it. "I made some calls, told some people what you did, and then those people told other people. And I want you to understand something, Emily, because I don't think you do yet." He turned, gesturing at the massive crowd behind him. Hundreds and hundreds of riders standing in near silence, watching this exchange unfold with a reverence that made Emily's chest tighten unbearably. "These aren't just riders who showed up for a party, Emily. Every single person standing in this parking lot rode here, some of them 4, 5, 6 hours, because they heard what you did and they wanted to be here for this." "For what, Jack? For what exactly?" Jack's jaw tightened, emotion working visibly across his weathered face. "You opened your door when nobody else would. Today we open ours for you." Emily stared at him, uncomprehending the words, not fully landing, until Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it toward her with hands that weren't entirely steady. "What is that? Read it." Emily unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, and it took her 3 tries to actually process what she was looking at: a cashier's check, official bank stamped, made out to Carter's Diner in the amount of $22,000. The parking lot swam in front of her eyes. "Jack, I can't accept this. I don't even know how you You're not accepting charity, Emily. Jack's voice hardened slightly, not unkind but firm. Every man and woman standing in this lot contributed to that check. Not because you owe us anything, because you reminded every single one of us what it feels like when somebody decides to see people instead of a headline. That's worth more to this club than money. The money's just how we say thank you in a language the bank understands. Emily's knees actually did buckle then, and Jack's hand shot out fast, steadying her elbow before she hit the ground. And around them she heard gasps from the gathered crowd, from Carol Dunbar, from townspeople who had spent 3 weeks whispering rumors about the very people now standing in front of them, proving every rumor wrong. I can't, Emily said again, tears streaming freely, now her voice barely holding together. Jack, this is too much. I can't take this from you, from all of you. You already gave us something we couldn't repay with money, Jack said quietly. Just for her, now his voice dropping beneath the murmur of the crowd. This isn't repayment. This is just us making sure the story doesn't end with you losing everything your father built, because one storm happened to cross paths with 56 of us on the worst night of the year. Lily, who had been watching this entire exchange with wide, uncertain eyes, suddenly darted forward and wrapped both arms around Jack's leg, the only part of him she could reach. Are you the granddaughter guy? She asked, looking up at him. Sophie's grandpa. Jack's composure, which had held through the entire speech, the check, the crowd, finally cracked completely at the sight of this small girl hugging his leg like he was someone worth trusting, and he knelt down to her level right there in the parking lot in front of hundreds of his own riders. That's right, sweetheart. I'm Sophie's grandpa. Are you going to fix Mommy's diner? She looks sad about it all the time. We're going to do a lot more than that, Lily. You just wait and see. Taru. The crowd began to move, then not all at once, but in waves, men and women dismounting, fully gathering in groups, and Emily watched in stunned disbelief as tools started appearing from saddlebags. Hammers, wrenches, rolls of wire ladders strapped to the sides of trucks that had apparently followed the motorcycles from somewhere Emily hadn't even noticed. Jack, what are they doing? What are Emily Carter? Jack stood brushing gravel from his knee, looking at her with an expression that finally allowed itself to show the full weight of what this day meant to him. We're not just handing you a check and riding off. We're rebuilding this place, roof to foundation, however long it takes. Jack, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, we're offering. There's a difference, and I need you to understand that difference because it matters. Before Emily could argue further, a woman stepped forward from the crowd. Tall, silver-haired, a leather vest covered in patches Emily didn't recognize, carrying herself with an authority that immediately commanded attention. Emily Carter. Yes, I'm sorry I don't. Diane Kowalski. I run logistics for 6 chapters across 2 states. Diane's handshake was firm businesslike, though her eyes carried the same wet emotion as everyone else's. Jack told us your situation. Furnace roof equipment, all of it falling apart faster than you can keep up with on your own. We got contractors here, real ones licensed. Some of our own members do this professionally when they're not riding. We've got electricians, plumbers, a roofing crew. Give us 3 days, and this diner is not going to look anything like it does right now. 3 days, Emily's voice came out strangled. Diane, that's not possible. A renovation like that would take weeks. Professional crews would charge. Wouldn't take weeks with 600 hands working on it, Diane said simply, and nobody's charging you a cent. Now you got blueprints for this place anywhere. Original layout from when your daddy built it. Emily blinked, overwhelmed, and somehow found herself walking Diane toward the back office where old records from her father's time still sat in a filing cabinet, the two of them pulling out yellowed papers, while outside the sound of hundreds of people transforming into an organized workforce grew louder by the minute. By early afternoon, what had been Emily's quiet, struggling roadside diner had become something closer to a full construction site, except unlike any construction site Emily had ever seen, because every single worker had ridden a motorcycle here, and half of them still wore leather vests while swinging hammers. Marcus, the biker who'd shown Lily photos of his motorcycle during the storm, appeared at Emily's side around noon, carrying a stack of lumber like it weighed nothing. Emily, good to see you again. Marcus! Emily's voice still hadn't fully recovered from the shock of the morning. I don't even know what to say to all of this. Don't need to say anything. Just let us work. He grinned, nodding toward Lily, who was following one of the younger riders around, asking 100 questions about the tools he was carrying. Your girl remembers me. She remembers all of you. Talks about that night more than I expected her to. Good memories are good for kids, even strange ones. Marcus moved off toward the roofline where three other riders were already assessing decades of storm damage that Emily had been too broke to fix for years. And Emily stood in the middle of her own parking lot, overwhelmed by motion and noise and purpose, swirling around her, feeling for the first time in 6 months like she wasn't drowning entirely alone. Tommy Reyes found her an hour later, walking with a slight limp, still but otherwise fully recovered, color back in his face, nothing like the barely breathing man Emily had fought to keep alive weeks earlier. Tommy. Emily's hand went to her chest. You're okay. You're really okay. Because of you. Tommy's voice was thick with something he wasn't quite hiding. I told you back then I wouldn't forget what you did. Guess I'm proving it today. Tommy, you don't have to. Emily. He cut her off gently but firmly. Let me say this. My uncle's the one who spread the word, got half these chapters mobilized. But I asked him to, because there wasn't a version of me hearing you were about to lose everything and just sitting at home doing nothing about it. Not after what you did for me. Emily didn't have words for that. She just nodded, throat too tight to speak, and Tommy squeezed her shoulder once before heading off to help with a section of fence that had been leaning dangerously for over a year. The afternoon brought its own complications, though, because word of 1,500 bikers descending on a small Montana town didn't stay contained to just Emily's property. Around 2 o'clock, a police cruiser pulled slowly into what remained of the parking lot's open space, and Emily felt her stomach drop as Sheriff Daniels, no relation to her husband, though the shared name had always felt like a cruel coincidence. To Emily stepped out, looking deeply uncertain about the scene in front of him. Afternoon, Emily. His hand rested near his belt, though not on his weapon, his eyes scanning the crowd with obvious wariness. Got about 6 different calls this morning about a small army taking over your property. Sheriff, everything's fine there. Ma'am, if I may? Jack stepped forward smoothly, hand extended toward the sheriff, with the same steady confidence Emily had watched him carry all day. Jack Morgan, I understand the concern, and I appreciate you responding quickly. We're not here to cause any trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. Sheriff Daniels looked between Jack and the sprawling crowd of leather-clad riders, clearly weighing his next move carefully. You mind explaining what exactly 1,500 Hells Angels are doing at a roadside diner in my county, Mr. Morgan? We're repaying a debt, Sheriff. This woman saved one of our men's life during that storm 3 weeks back. Sheltered 56 of us when nobody else in this town would open their door. We're here to make sure she doesn't lose her diner to a foreclosure that happened because her husband ran out on her with debts she didn't know existed. The sheriff's expression shifted slightly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders as he glanced toward Emily. That's true, Emily. Every word, Sheriff. They're not causing any trouble. They're fixing my roof. Sheriff Daniels studied the scene a moment longer. Men repairing fence lines, patching the roof, a group of riders carefully wiring new electrical panels under the supervision of someone who was apparently a licensed electrician by trade, and something in the sheer organized purpose of it all seemed to finally convince him. All right, he nodded slowly. I'll let the town know there's nothing to worry about here. But Mr. Morgan, I'd appreciate a heads up next time 1,500 motorcycles decide to descend on my jurisdiction. Wasn't exactly planned with precision, Sheriff. Word spreads fast when the story's worth telling. The sheriff almost smiled at that, tipped his hat toward Emily, and climbed back into his cruiser, and Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, watching one more potential disaster dissolve into something manageable. But the town's suspicion didn't dissolve as easily as the sheriff's had. Roger Ellison showed up around 3, standing at the edge of the property with his arms crossed, watching the transformation with open disapproval on his face. This is a mistake, Emily, he said when she approached him, unable to ignore his presence any longer. You don't know these people. You don't know what strings come attached to something like this. There's no strings, Roger. They're just helping. Nobody just helps Emily. Not like this. Not for free. You didn't just help either, Roger, when my dad was sick, and you extended his account at the hardware store for 6 months without asking for a dime up front. You remember that? Roger's jaw tightened. That's different. How is it different? Because he looked like the kind of man you'd trust, and they don't. Roger didn't have an answer for that, and Emily felt something firm settle into her chest. Something that had been building all day, watching people the whole town had warned her about work tirelessly without complaint, without any expectation of return, to save something that mattered to her more than anything else she owned. You've spent 3 weeks telling me I made a mistake letting them in during that storm, Emily said quieter now. Look at my roof, Roger. Look at my fence line. Tell me again what mistake I made. Roger looked at the organized chaos of the property at Diane Kowalski, directing a team with blueprint precision at Marcus and Tommy, and a dozen others whose names Emily still didn't know, working without a single complaint under a cold Montana sky, and something in his hardened expression finally shifted. I'll admit, he said slowly, I didn't expect this. Neither did I. Sorry. By late afternoon, Carol Dunbar approached Emily near the counter, where Emily had set up an impromptu coffee station, trying to keep at least some small gesture of hospitality flowing toward the small army working on her property. Emily, I owe you an apology. Carol's voice was smaller than Emily had ever heard it. I said some things this week, believed some things. Watching all this, I feel foolish for it. You don't have to apologize, Carol. I do, though. I judged people I'd never met based on nothing but leather jackets and old stories. And you saw something the rest of us didn't. Carol looked out at the crowd, voice thick. You saw people. Emily didn't have a sharp response to that, just a tired, grateful nod, because 6 months of exhaustion and judgment had worn her down to a place where grace, even delayed grace, still landed heavy and welcome. As the sun began sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across a property that already looked unrecognizable from the sagging, storm-damaged diner it had been that morning, Jack found Emily standing near the newly repaired fence line, watching the transformation, with an expression somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. You holding up okay? He asked. I don't even know how to answer that, Jack. This morning I woke up counting down 26 days until I lost everything. Now I'm standing here watching 1,500 strangers while I rebuild my entire life in an afternoon. Not strangers, Jack said gently. Not anymore. Soon. Emily looked at him, something vulnerable crossing her face. Why, Jack, really? Why go this far for one night of shelter? Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the crowd, toward Tommy, laughing with a group near the roof toward Marcus, showing Lily how to properly hold a hammer under close supervision. I told you once that half these men wear this patch because it's the only place that ever accepted them broken, he said finally. But there's another part of that story I didn't tell you. What part? Jack's jaw tightened, old grief surfacing behind his eyes. I had a daughter once, younger than you are now. Lost her years back during a hard stretch of my life I'm not proud of. Ever since then, I've been looking for ways to make something right that I know I can never fully fix. Emily's chest ached at the raw honesty in his voice. Jack, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, just understand something. He turned to face her fully. When I watched you save Tommy's life that night, when I watched you protect your own daughter, while still opening your heart to 56 strangers who scared you half to death, I saw something in you I hadn't seen in a long time. Somebody who chooses compassion even when it costs her something. He paused, throat working. Helping you isn't just repaying a debt, Emily. It's the closest thing I've found to healing in a long, long time. Emily didn't trust herself to speak for a moment, tears slipping freely down her face, and Jack seeming to understand there was nothing more to say that words could improve, simply placed a steady hand on her shoulder and let the silence hold what needed holding. As evening approached, Diane Kowalski found Emily near the diner's entrance, clipboard and hand expressions satisfied despite the exhaustion visible in her posture. Roof's done, Diane said. New furnace goes in tomorrow morning. Parts are already in transit. Electrical's fully updated to code. Fence lines solid. We'll have crews back the next 2 days finishing interior work flooring, paint some updated equipment for your kitchen, since half of what you had was older than some of these riders. Diane, I don't know how to thank you for this. Any of this. Don't need thanks. Need you to keep doing what you did that night. Keep being the kind of person who opens doors when everybody else keeps them locked. Diane's expression softened slightly. World's better with more people like you in it, Emily Carter. We're just making sure it stays that way a little longer. As the light faded and riders began the slow process of packing tools, checking bikes, preparing for the ride back to wherever they'd come from, Emily stood in the middle of what had been 12 hours earlier, a diner one bank notice away from being lost forever. Now it stood transformed. Not finished, Diane had made clear there was still work ahead over the coming days, but already unrecognizable from the sagging, dying building it had been that morning. Jack approached her one final time as engines began roaring back to life across the lot, the same massive sound that had terrified her hours earlier, now settling into something that felt impossibly like comfort. "We'll be back tomorrow," he said. "Mahler crew finished the interior work, but I wanted you to hear this from me directly before we head out tonight." "What is it?" "This isn't the end of it, Emily. What happened here today, what you did during that storm, it's already traveling further than either of us expected. Sal tells me chapters as far as Wyoming and the Dakotas have been asking questions, wanting to know more about the woman who saved Tommy's life and opened her door when nobody else would." Emily's stomach tightened with something between gratitude and apprehension. "What does that mean, Jack?" Jack's eyes carried a weight that told Emily this story wasn't finished unfolding yet, that whatever had started with one desperate knock on her door during a blizzard had already grown into something larger than either of them had originally set into motion. "It means, Emily Carter," he said slowly, "that your name's become something bigger than just a diner owner who helped some bikers survive a storm. And I don't think either of us fully understands yet just how far that's going to reach." He climbed onto his bike as the engine swelled around them, and Emily stood in her parking lot watching 1,500 riders prepare to disappear back down the highway, the same way they'd arrived, leaving behind a transformed property and a woman who understood for the first time that whatever had started that stormy night was far from finished. The riders kept their promise about coming back, though nothing about the following days felt small the way Jack had suggested it would. By Saturday morning, a crew of nearly 40 had returned trucks loaded with flooring materials, paint, and a brand new commercial furnace, still wrapped in factory plastic, and Emily stood on her porch, watching them unload, with the same disbelief she hadn't fully shaken since Friday's impossible arrival. "Morning, Emily." Diane Kowalski climbed out of the lead truck, clipboard already in hand, looking like a woman who hadn't stopped moving since yesterday. "Furnace goes in first. Can't have you freezing again before winter's even done with us." "Diane, you didn't have to come back so soon, I thought." "We said interior work, didn't we? Man's word means something in this club, Emily, especially Jack's." Emily helped where she could, mostly staying out of the way, while professionals who apparently spent their weekdays as licensed contractors and their weekends on motorcycles methodically transformed her kitchen, her dining room, her entire life, piece by piece. Around noon, Tommy Reyes showed up carrying a toolbox, moving without any trace of the limp Emily remembered from the week before. "Tommy, you're supposed to still be resting. Doctor cleared me 2 days ago. Told me not to overdo the riding, said nothing about swinging a hammer." He grinned, setting his toolbox down near the counter. "Besides, wasn't going to miss helping finish what we started." Lily appeared from the back room, having spent the morning watching cartoons while the noise of construction filled the building, and her face lit up seeing Tommy standing there. "You're the one Mommy fixed." "That's right, kiddo, good memory. Are you going to fix the diner too?" "Already working on it." Lily studied him with the serious concentration only a 5-year-old could manage. "Can I help?" Tommy glanced at Emily, silently asking permission, and Emily nodded, some warmth spreading through her chest at how naturally her daughter had folded these men into her world, how completely her earlier fear had transformed into trust. "Sure you can help," Tommy said. "Every good crew needs a supervisor." Lily beamed immediately, assigning herself the very serious job of handing Tommy nails one at a time from a small paper cup, and Emily watched them work together with an ache in her chest that felt like healing. By early afternoon, the old cracked linoleum floor had been completely torn up, replaced with new flooring that made the entire diner feel brighter, newer, more alive than it had in years, and Emily found herself standing in the middle of it, overwhelmed once again. "This is too much," she said quietly to Diane, who was overseeing the final section being laid. "All of this, Diane, I keep saying it and I keep meaning it. This is too much." "Emily." Diane set down her clipboard, turning to face her directly. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course. I've been doing logistics for this network 15 years. Organized fundraisers for injured riders, funeral processions for members. We lost disaster relief after floods and fires. You probably never even heard about because we don't do this for publicity. Diane's voice carried quiet conviction. In 15 years, I've never seen mobilization happen this fast, this completely for someone outside the club. You know why? Why? Because what you did during that storm wasn't just kindness, it was defiance. You looked at everything this world tells people to be afraid of, and you chose to see past it anyway at real risk to yourself and your daughter. That's rare, Emily. Rarer than you probably realize. We're not just fixing your diner. We're honoring something most people don't have the courage to do. Emily didn't trust her voice enough to respond, just nodded, blinking back tears that seemed to arrive more easily these days than they ever had before, and Diane squeezed her arm once before returning to her clipboard, leaving Emily standing in a half-finished dining room that somehow already felt more like home than it had in years. The real complication arrived Sunday morning, though, in a form Emily hadn't anticipated at all. She was refilling coffee near the counter when the bell above the door rang, and she looked up expecting another rider or another curious neighbor, only to feel her entire body go rigid at the sight of the man standing in her doorway. Daniel, her husband, the man who'd left 6 months ago in the middle of the night with a note instead of a goodbye, the man whose hidden debts had nearly cost her everything, standing now in the doorway of a diner that had been transformed by strangers into something better than he'd ever helped her build it into. Emily, his voice was careful, testing the air between them. Heard some things happened here. Wanted to see for myself. You have some nerve showing up here, Daniel. Emily's voice shook, though whether from fear or fury she couldn't entirely tell. After everything, you just walk back in like nothing happened. I heard about the mortgage situation, figured maybe I could help make things right. Help, Emily's laugh came out sharp, bitter. You want to help now? 6 months too late, Daniel. 6 months of me drowning alone while you were wherever you were, and now that strangers fixed what you broke, you show up wanting credit. That's not what this is, Emily. Then what is it? Before Daniel could answer, Tommy appeared from the back room, drawn by the raised voices, and his expression hardened immediately upon seeing the tension in the room, positioning himself subtly between Daniel and Emily without making it look deliberate. Everything all right here? Tommy's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. This isn't your business, Daniel said, eyeing Tommy's leather vest with obvious discomfort. Emily's my business, Tommy said simply. She saved my life. Makes anything concerning her my business too. Daniel's jaw tightened, clearly recalculating whatever he'd walked in here planning to say, and Emily felt something steady in her chest, watching Tommy's quiet, unwavering presence. A stark contrast to the man who'd once promised to protect her and instead abandoned her to drown. Daniel, Emily said, finding her voice again stronger now, I don't need anything from you. Not your help, not your apologies, not your presence in this diner. You made your choice 6 months ago. I've made mine since then. Please leave. Emily, we were married. Emily cut him off, to a man who let me believe our savings were intact while he secretly mortgaged everything my father built. A man who left in the middle of the night instead of facing what he'd done. That man doesn't get to walk back in now that things are looking up and pretend he's owed something. Daniel looked between Emily's resolute expression and Tommy's steady, unmoving presence, and something in his posture finally deflated. I just wanted to see if you were okay, he said quietly. I'm better than okay, Daniel. No thanks to you. He left without another word, the bell above the door ringing once more as it closed behind him, and Emily stood frozen for a moment before her legs finally gave out into the nearest booth, adrenaline and old grief crashing through her all at once. You okay? Tommy asked gently, sitting across from her. I don't know. I thought I was past being afraid of him showing up again. Guess some fears don't fully leave. You handled that like someone who's already healed more than she realizes, Tommy said. Man came in looking for an opening. You didn't give him one. Emily managed a shaky smile. Guess I've had good teachers lately about standing your ground. Word of Daniel's brief appearance spread through the small crew, working that day faster than Emily expected, and by afternoon, Jack himself called to check in, having heard secondhand what happened. Tommy told me your husband showed up, Jack said, without preamble when Emily answered. You all right? I'm fine, Jack. Really, I handled it. I know you did. Tommy said you handled it better than most people twice your size would have. There was pride in his voice, unmistakable. Just wanted you to hear directly that if he comes back around causing trouble, You call me first. Understand? Jack, I can't keep asking you and your club to solve my problems. Wasn't asking permission, Emily. Was telling you how things work now. His voice softened. You're not alone in this anymore. Might take some getting used to, but that's just the truth of it now. Emily sat with that thought long after the call ended, turning it over in her mind, the strange, overwhelming reality that 6 months of isolated struggle had somehow impossibly transformed into a life where people actually showed up, actually meant it, when they said they had her back. By Monday, the diner's interior renovation was nearly complete. New paint on the walls, updated equipment gleaming in the kitchen, and Emily stood in the middle of it all, trying to process how completely her circumstances had shifted in the span of 4 days. That afternoon, Marlene Whitfield returned, apparently having heard through town gossip about the diner's transformation, her expression considerably less confident than it had been during her previous visit. Emily, Marlene's voice carried none of its earlier condescension. I heard about everything that happened here. Wanted to come see for myself. If you're here about your client's offer again, Marlene, the answer's still no. Even more no than before. That's actually not why I'm here. Marlene looked genuinely uncertain, an expression Emily had never seen on her before. I wanted to apologize, actually, for pushing so hard for suggesting you sell when you clearly had other options I didn't know about. You didn't know because there weren't other options, Marlene. Not until 4 days ago. Still, Marlene glanced around at the renovated space, clearly impressed despite herself. This is remarkable what they did here. I misjudged the situation, and I misjudged you thinking you'd fold under pressure. Emily didn't have much grace left to offer after the week she'd had, but something in Marlene's genuine discomfort softened her slightly. We're all learning something this week, I guess, Emily said, about judging people too quickly. Marlene nodded, something almost humble in her expression, and left without pushing further, and Emily allowed herself a small, tired smile at the strange cascading effect one impossible storm had set into motion across her entire town. That evening, after the crew had finished for the day and the diner sat quiet and gleaming under new lighting, Jack arrived alone without the usual entourage of riders, his motorcycle the only one in a parking lot that had held 1,500 just days earlier. Jack? Emily looked up from where she'd been sitting at the newly finished counter, exhaustion and disbelief still settling into something she couldn't quite name yet. I didn't expect to see you tonight. Wanted to check on things myself, and I wanted to tell you something in person, not over the phone. What is it? Jack settled onto a stool across from her, weathered hands folding together on the counter. Tommy told me about your husband stopping by. Emily's shoulders tensed slightly. I handled it, Jack. I already told you that. I know you did. That is not why I'm bringing it up. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want you to understand something about what happened here this week, Emily. This wasn't just about fixing a diner or paying off a mortgage. Then what was it about? It was about proving something. To this town, to your husband, to yourself, maybe most of all. Jack's eyes held hers steadily. You spent 6 months believing you had to survive everything alone, that nobody was coming to help, that the only people who'd ever really shown up for you were gone or never really there to begin with. We wanted you to understand in a way words alone couldn't manage that you were wrong about that. Emily's eyes filled again, the exhaustion of the week catching up with her all at once. I don't know how to thank you for that, Jack. Any of it. Don't need thanks. Jack's voice carried something gentler now, something almost paternal. Just need you to remember it. Next time things get hard, next time the world tries convincing you that you're alone in facing it, remember this week. Remember that sometimes the people everybody warns you about turn out to be exactly the ones who show up when it matters most. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the diner around them gleaming with new paint and new floors and new life, and Emily found herself thinking about her father, about the words he'd given her that had led to opening the door that stormy night, wondering if some part of him somewhere understood how far that single choice had traveled. Jack, she said finally, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Your daughter, the one you lost, do you think she'd be proud of what you're doing? Turning that grief into something like this? Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, carrying old weight that Emily recognized now as something similar to her own grief over the marriage she'd lost, the trust that had been broken. I like to think so, he said, finally, a voice rough. She had a good heart, my girl. Better than mine most days. If watching me do right by someone like you helps me feel closer to the man she always believed I could be, then yeah, I think she'd be proud. Emily reached across the counter and squeezed his weathered hand, and for a moment, two people who'd both lost something essential sat together in a rebuilt diner, finding something like peace in each other's company. The following days brought a strange new rhythm to Emily's life, one she was still adjusting to. The diner, fully renovated, now began attracting customers in numbers she hadn't seen in years. Word of the incredible story spreading not just through gossip, but through actual news coverage. A local station picking up the story of the single mother and the 1,500 bikers who'd saved her business. "Emily Carter, everyone's talking about you," said a young reporter named Sarah Mills who'd shown up Wednesday morning requesting an interview. "This story's touched people real deep. Would you be willing to share what happened in your own words?" Emily hesitated, uncomfortable with the sudden attention after months of feeling invisible. But something in her had shifted enough over the past week to say yes. "I just did what my father taught me," she told the camera, Lily standing beside her holding her hand. "Never judge someone when they need help the most. That's all this was. I saw people who needed shelter and I gave it. Everything after that was them choosing to be exactly the kind of people the world doesn't expect them to be." The interview aired that evening, and by the next morning, the diner's phone hadn't stopped ringing people from 3 counties over, wanting to visit, wanting to see the place where such an extraordinary story had unfolded. And Emily found herself managing a level of business she hadn't experienced since her father's healthiest years running the place. Frank, watching the steady stream of new customers with something like wonder, finally spoke what they'd both been thinking. "Emily, I don't think we're going to need to worry about that bank again." "No," Emily said, looking around at her transformed diner, filled now with customers humming with life in a way it hadn't in years. "I don't think we are." That weekend, Jack returned with a smaller group, Marcus, Tommy, and Diane among them, not for construction this time, but simply to sit, to eat, to be present in the space they'd helped rebuild. "Feels different in here now," Marcus said, looking around at the renovated dining room. "Good different." "Feels different for me, too," Emily admitted, refilling their coffees personally, despite now having 2 additional staff members to help handle the increased business. "I keep waiting to wake up and realize this was all some impossible dream." "It's not a dream," Jack said. "It's just what happens when people remember how to be decent to each other. Rarer than it should be, but real when it happens." Lily appeared then, having grown entirely comfortable around these men who'd once terrified her, climbing onto the stool beside Tommy without hesitation. "Are you going to come visit again?" she asked, "even though the diner's all fixed now?" Tommy glanced at Jack, then back at Lily, something warm crossing his face. "Kiddo," he said, "I think we're going to be visiting for a long, long time." Emily watched this exchange with her chest full of an emotion she still didn't have adequate words for: gratitude. Certainly, but something deeper too. Something that felt like the slow, careful rebuilding of faith she'd thought she'd lost entirely during those 6 lonely months of struggling alone. She had no way of knowing yet just how far this story would continue traveling, how many more lives it would touch beyond her own small corner of Montana, or how completely her life was about to be transformed by the ripple effects of one impossible snow-covered night. But standing there surrounded by unlikely friends in a diner rebuilt by strangers who'd become something like family, Emily allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to simply feel grateful for exactly where she stood. 3 weeks passed, and the diner Emily's father had built decades earlier had become something none of them could have predicted the night that storm first rolled through Montana. Business had tripled. The renovated dining room stayed full most days, now filled with locals who'd once whispered rumors and travelers who'd heard the story on the news and driven hours just to see the place for themselves, and Emily found herself hiring 2 more employees just to keep pace with a demand she hadn't experienced since her father's healthiest years running the counter. But it was a Tuesday afternoon quiet between lunch and dinner rushes when Jack walked in carrying something Emily hadn't expected. "Got something for you," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the counter. "Jack, if this is another check, I already told you. It's not money, open it." Emily's hands were unsteady as she pulled out the contents, photographs, dozens of them printed and organized carefully into a small binder. She flipped through the first few pages and felt her breath catch. 56 bikers standing in a blizzard. Tommy being carried inside half-conscious. herself younger looking somehow despite it only being weeks ago kneeling beside him with blankets in her hands. Where did these come from? One of the younger riders, a Danny, he'd been taking photos that whole night on his phone, mostly for his own memory. When word started spreading about what you did, he put together this whole collection. Wanted you to have it. Wanted you to always remember exactly what that night looked like, not just what people say it looked like. Emily turned the pages slowly, tears gathering as she moved through the images. Lily hugging Jack's leg in the parking lot the day 1,500 riders arrived, Tommy teaching her to hold a hammer, Diane directing the massive renovation crew with clipboard precision. The very last photograph stopped her cold. It was the whole crew, all 1,500 of them, gathered in the parking lot on that first incredible day. And there in the center, small against the enormous crowd, stood Emily and Lily, surrounded on all sides by people who'd chosen to show up for them. "Jack," she whispered, I don't have words for this. Don't need words, just needed you to have it." That evening after closing, Emily sat with Lily on the newly finished floor of the diner, showing her daughter the photographs one by one, watching Lily's small face light up with recognition at each familiar figure. "That's Tommy, and that's Marcus with his big motorcycle picture." "That's right, baby." "Mommy, why did they help us so much? We didn't even know them before." Emily considered the question carefully, wanting to give her daughter an answer that would matter, that would stick with her long after this strange, impossible chapter of their lives had settled into ordinary memory. "Because sometimes," Emily said slowly, "the people the world tells us to be scared of turn out to be exactly the people who protect us most. And because one small kindness, when it's real, can travel farther than we ever expect it to." Lily considered this with the serious concentration only a 5-year-old could summon. "Like a pebble in water. Like when you throw one in the lake and it makes circles that keep going and going." Emily's chest tightened with unexpected emotion at her daughter's simple, perfect metaphor. Exactly like that, baby. Exactly like that. The following week brought an unexpected visitor, Sarah Mills, the reporter, who'd first covered the story, returning with the request Emily hadn't anticipated. "Emily, the story's gone national. Papers as far as Chicago and Denver have been reaching out wanting the full account. There's even been talk of a segment on one of the network morning shows. Sarah, I appreciate it, but I'm not sure I want that kind of attention. I just want to run my diner, raise my daughter. I understand completely, and there's no pressure, but I wanted to ask because I think it matters. Would you be willing to do one more interview? Not about you necessarily. About them. About what 1,500 people showing up like that actually means in a world that spends so much time telling us to be afraid of each other." Emily thought about Jack's grief-worn face admitting his lost daughter, about Tommy's quiet devotion after nearly dying, about Diane's fierce belief that decency deserved defending, about an entire network of people the world had taught her to fear who had instead rebuilt her life brick by brick without asking for anything in return. "Yeah," Emily said finally, "I'll do it, but only if it's really about them, about what they represent, not just what they did for me." The interview aired the following Sunday evening, and this time Emily made sure the focus stayed exactly where she wanted it, not on herself, but on stories like Tommy's, on veterans who'd found family in each other after the world turned its back on them, on Marcus rebuilding purpose after losing his wife on Jack, transforming grief into protection for others. "People see the leather, the patches, the reputation," Emily told the camera, Jack standing quietly beside her during the segment, "and they think they understand everything about who these men are. But underneath all of that are people who've survived their own storms, who understand better than anyone what it means when somebody chooses to show up instead of turning away." The response to that interview surprised everyone. Messages poured in from across the country, other small business owners who'd been helped anonymously by motorcycle clubs over the years, finally speaking up about their own experiences, veterans sharing stories about finding community in similar groups after struggling to reintegrate into civilian life, people who'd simply been moved by watching an entire network of strangers choose compassion over convenience. Emily. Jack found her behind the counter one evening, phone in hand, expression somewhere between disbelief and quiet pride. "You know what you did with that interview." "What do you mean?" "You changed the story, not just about that night, about all of it, about us." He turned his phone toward her, showing a message from another chapter president 3 states away. "Fella here saying calls have been coming in all week, people wanting to know how to support veteran outreach programs some of our chapters run. Programs that have been struggling for funding for years, suddenly getting more attention than they've had in a decade. Emily felt something settle deeply into her chest, understanding now the true weight of what had started that stormy night. That wasn't me, Jack. That was you. All of you being exactly who you are. Wouldn't have happened without you choosing to see it first. Weeks turned into a month, and the diner's success continued, steady, unshaken now by the financial terror that had once consumed Emily's every waking thought. But it was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Jack arrived with news that would shift everything one final time. Emily, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Emily's stomach tightened instinctively, old fear rising despite months of evidence that Jack Morgan had never once brought her anything but good news. What is it? The club's been talking about what happened here, about the ripple effect it's had not just for you, but for how people are starting to see us differently. And we want to do something more permanent. Jack, you've already done more than I could ever. Let me finish. Jack's expression carried a seriousness Emily hadn't seen from him before, not even during the storm. We want to establish a scholarship fund for kids like Lily, kids from families struggling the way yours was, kids who need help getting through school without the crushing weight adults sometimes carry into their whole lives. We want to name it after your father. Emily's breath caught entirely. Jack, that's my father wasn't anybody special. He was just a man who ran a diner. Your father raised a woman who opened her door to 56 strangers in a blizzard instead of turning away out of fear. That makes him somebody special. Emily, somebody worth remembering. Tears streamed freely down Emily's face now, and she found herself unable to form words adequate to the moment, simply nodding, overwhelmed entirely by the endless, cascading kindness that one impossible night had set into motion. The Carter Foundation, Jack continued softly. First scholarships go out this fall. We're already getting applications from families across 3 counties. That evening, after the diner closed and Lily had fallen asleep upstairs, Emily sat alone at the counter looking out at the parking lot where 1,500 motorcycles had once filled every available inch of space, thinking about the impossible distance her life had traveled since that freezing December night. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jack. Almost forgot to mention, Sophie wants to meet Lily sometime. Thinks she sounds like the kind of friend worth having. Emily smiled, typing back immediately. Lily would love that. Tell Sophie we'd be honored. She set the phone down, looking around at her transformed diner. New floors, new equipment, new life pulsing through walls that had once felt like they were closing in around her, and allowed herself finally completely to feel something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Safe. Not because a storm had passed, or because a debt had been paid, or even because 1,500 motorcycles had once filled her parking lot in an act of impossible generosity. But because she understood now in a way she never fully had before that she wasn't alone anymore. That somewhere along the way, choosing compassion over fear had built her something more valuable than money could ever replace: a community, a family, a network of people who would show up again and again exactly when it mattered most. Months later, on a warm summer evening, entirely unlike the freezing night that had started everything, Emily stood outside her diner, watching Lily run across the parking lot with Sophie, Jack's granddaughter, the two of them laughing together like they'd been friends their entire lives instead of just a few months. Jack stood beside her, watching the girls with the same quiet contentment Emily had come to recognize in him. Never thought I'd see this, Jack said. My granddaughter and your daughter running around like family. Never thought I'd see any of this, Emily admitted. A year ago, I was drowning, Jack. Genuinely drowning, and I didn't think anyone was coming to save me. But someone did. No, Emily shook her head, smiling. I did. I opened the door. Everything after that was just people proving that kindness still means something in this world. Jack was quiet for a moment, watching the girls chase each other across the lot. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of everything they built together since that stormy night. You know what the real lesson here is, Emily? It's not really about bikers or storms or foreclosures or any of the specific details people love repeating when they tell this story. Then what is it? It's that the world spends so much energy teaching us who to fear, who to judge, who to lock our doors against. But every single time somebody has the courage to look past all that noise and just see another human being who needs help, something powerful happens. Something that ripples out further than anyone expects. Emily looked out at her diner rebuilt, thriving a symbol now, not just for her own community, but for something larger. A story that had traveled across state lines, inspired scholarships, changed how strangers looked at each other in 100 small towns across the country. A single act of kindness, she said softly, changing an entire community. Changing more than that, Jack said. Changing what people believe is possible when they choose compassion over fear. The sign above her diner's entrance, freshly painted just weeks earlier, caught the last light of the summer evening, spelling out words that had become something of a local legend, now Emily's haven built by kindness. Because sometimes the people the world tells us to fear most turn out to be exactly the ones who save us. And sometimes one small act of courage, one door opened instead of locked, one moment of compassion chosen over convenience creates a wave so powerful it changes not just one life, but hundreds, rippling outward in circles that never truly stop. Emily Carter had learned this lesson in the coldest night of her life, and she would spend the rest of her days proving it true, one open door at a time.